For lesson 35 in our Saxon book, this is our change in coordinates lesson. What we're going to be talking about here is that when we're starting at a certain coordinate and going to another, we have a change in coordinates. It would be where we started from to where we ended. Now, the easy thing for us to forget when we're doing this is what we're really saying. I drew a small number line up here, and if I started at the number 3 and I walked all the way down here, this direction, to -1, I would want to know what the change in my position was. I would very easily say this was my initial position, this was my final position, and I'm going to say that my final minus my initial will be my change in direction. Well, my final is at -1, and my initial, so I'll subtract my initial, was at 3, and I'll say -1 minus 3, which is going to give me a direction of -4. And so from here to here is going the direction of, going left, making it negative, a -4 in my direction. If I were to go from -1 to +3, I would say my final 3 minus my initial, which is going to give me the other direction. So if I did the same thing going the other way, I would say my final, which is 3, minus my initial, which was -1, and I'm going to have a direction of 4. Now, the important thing to remember on number lines is they're just working with one dimension. But if I do a change in coordinates like this, I can start labeling this and saying, where do I want to start? Well, this is my point 1 right here, and I'm going from point 1 all the way down to point 2 down here. Well, how would I do that? Looking at remembering my number line example, I did my final minus my initial. Well, I started at P1 and I went to P2. So I'm going to say this is going to be P2 minus P1. Well, I have two different defining factors for these points, and that would be my x value and my y value for each one of these. If I started labeling this correctly, I would say my x2 or x1 value and y1 value, and my x2 value and y2 value. So when I start looking at them, I can say, well, this was my point 1 here. Here's my point 2, and I'm going to start at point 1 and go to point 2. So I'm going to actually, on my formula, which is point 2 minus point 1, I'm going to look at x2 and say minus x1. And I'm going to say y2 minus y1. So if I did that, I would say my x2 minus my x1. Well, my x2 value on this equation will be my second point x value. So I'm going to say -3 minus my x1, which is going to be 3. And -3 minus 3, and I'm going to end up with a -6. This is my change, or my delta x, my change in my x. My change in my y, I'm going to use my y2 value, which was also -3, y2 value, and subtract from that my y1 value, which was 2, -3 minus 2, and that's going to give me a -5. So my delta y is -5. And that's my change in my coordinates. I could look at these and say, to get from this location here down to this location here, I would look at my x line, and if I did that, I would go back 6 units. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Because it's negative, on my y value, I'm going to go from there and go down 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that would be another way to talk about or to describe that. And I would look at this and say my change is negative and negative. And this length here, which was 6, and this one was 5, and I'm putting negatives on it to show the direction. If I started this one and went to this other direction, it would just be the same thing, except those would both be positive because I'd be going up 5 and over 6, or over 6 and up 5.